All right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Dangerous, Affected and Insanitary Buildings Policy Review Hearing Agenda. Like to just welcome you all and thanks for putting your submissions forward. Looking forward to hearing what you've got to say. We will start, and thank you also to the staff for all the hard work that they've done on this. And we'll start with an opening karakia, and you are welcome to join us with this. Whakataka, te hei ki te uru. Whakataka te hei ki te tonga, kia mākinakina, kia utu, kia mā tararata, kia tai, e hei ake ana te atakura, he tio, he huka, he heihu, te he moriora. Do we have any apologies? Right, we're not going to take our third submitter as an apology. I guess she hasn't given an apology, so we'll move on from that. Right, so our hearing submissions, we have... Oh, do we have any conflicts of interest?
I haven't.
Neither do I. Samuel Wilshire, if you'd like to go first, followed by John Berry. So there will be a timer on the screen behind you. Oh, we're just going to do it on a phone. So do you want to just tell us how you're going to roll with that? Brilliant. Okay, great. Thank you.
Good morning. Good morning, Selwyn. Thank you for the opportunity to present this submission. For a little context, I'll introduce myself. I'm the owner and operator of Wilshire Construction, a local company who specialises in restoration of character homes, leaky home remediation and earthquake repairs and strengthening. We pride ourselves on finding cost-effective and practical solutions to structure remediations. On reading the Dangerous, Affected and Insanitary Building Policy, I do find myself agreeing with most of this document, but I have a couple of concerns with the definitions of what or could deem a building dangerous, affected or insanitary. 1. Potable water. There are a number of community-used buildings that are currently placarded as unpotable water. I would assume this is in regard to the buildings not having a chlorinated water supply. In my opinion, for just that reason, it makes the water more potable. I know many of the council staff would possibly disagree. Many in our district supply their own water from bores. If these properties were to be controlled by council in the future, would this policy deem these buildings insanitary due to no chlorination being available? I remember as a kid growing up in Selwyn, many homes having rainwater tanks or supply from water races. By this definition, most tramping huts in New Zealand would be deemed insanitary from their rainwater collection. I personally think an amendment should be made to show a table of what is deemed unpotable. I grew up on tramping hut rainwater and bore water well. I'd rather drink that stuff than what comes from our tap in the towns personally. 2, sewage. I agree that any failed sewage system could have hugely negative effects on the health of our community, especially for those who are young, elderly or vulnerable. But perhaps a mention that if temporary allowances are made for portable toilets, i.e. portaloos, when the homeowner endeavours to rectify the issue or save for the cost to remediate should be mentioned. 3, a building is dangerous for the purposes of this Act if, 1A, in the ordinary course of events excluding the occurrence of an earthquake, the building is likely to cause injury or death, whether by collapse or otherwise, to any other persons in it or to persons on other property. This one confuses me. So dangerous building is not an earthquake-prone building then? I personally think that's great. Many new construction homes during the Christchurch earthquake sequence failed spectacularly and were compliant with the code at the time of construction. Some were even within 5 years of the build date prior to the earthquake. One thing that did come out of the earthquakes was evidence of how well built some of our older homes were constructed. Yes, ring foundations failed and some lath and plaster cracked, but on average, timber framed with lightly cladding dwellings performed beautifully. On average, the earthquake-prone placards are thrown around a little too liberally these days. Many of these buildings labelled earthquake-prone, ironically, have been put to the best test possible and performed as they should. They allowed occupants and visitors to vacate and stayed standing. Number 4. I would hope that all options are considered for when a placard is placed on the building, including if the building can't be occupied or used, then rates would only be on the land and not the building value. I'd also like to know whether homeowners or community groups are able to gain their own independent reports and utilise the land value through council, just as the council itself has done. It seems unfair that if the council can hold an interest in the land value to undertake assessments or remediation and not allow the owner to utilise the same option. Now I'll move to the slideshow, of which relevance will become more clear as we go. I'm disappointed with the performance of our newly constructed buildings and older Sullivan-owned assets. Not so much due to their construction, but more predominantly due to deferred maintenance. A lack of action upon discovery of envelope failure, as you can see in the images provided. First frame is the Leaston Library. Monolithic cladding has cracks that are in keeping with lintel shift during the earthquake movement. It would appear this has simply been sealed then repainted. No chasing out, no crack and lime lock, and no mesh and replaster. Although not seen in the photos provided, this building had an allowance of $312,000 to replace the roof as it was considered end of life, and this wasn't done. Instead, minor patchwork was conducted, leading to significant mould growth and water ingress. I think this is an absolute travesty of mismanagement. I gather council want to build a new library, but to effectively throw away a council-owned asset like this is very poor form. Placards on this building claimed nobody was to approach the building for 30 days, assuming to the viable airborne mould spores. But I would ask, what happened to the books? And what happened to the soft furnishings during those 30 days? The next 2 frames... Next 2 frames are also of the Leaston Library and the calibre of maintenance provided to our community buildings. Frame 4 to 12 is the beautiful West Mountain Community Centre, a building that ratepayers have forked out good money for. I was horrified when attending a Melbourne Community Board meeting to see the state and disarray this amazing asset was in. It's not just a roof leak that's popped up overnight. It's my understanding this damage has been known about for well over a month and a half now and continues to leak. All linings have been damaged, flooring is lifting and growing mould underneath to numerous rooms now, and only on the 3rd of June was a contractor actually on site to inspect. That's according to the sign-in book at the front desk. If this is the speed at which council react to a consistent leak, then I think we're in very big trouble, and it won't be long before all our community buildings end up in the same fate as the Leaston Library. Not included in my photos, but still worth a mention, I'll just run through some of these, of our beautiful new West Mountain Community Centre. There's all the flooring underlay, that's all covered in mouldy bits. It must have been gushing in there. That's a cracked tilt slab that's got water leaching from it. Not included in my photos, but still well worth a mention, the Lincoln Events Centre and the Lincoln Library. The Lincoln Events Centre has significant water staining all over the suspended ceiling. Is this another amazing asset that will fall into the DAIB category in years to come? Not to mention the recent comments in council about the library. How long has council known about the issues and what responsibilities have been placed onto the original contractor for remediation regarding the failure? Or is this just another scenario where John and Jane Ratepayer will pick up the bill? In conclusion, the policy seems clearer, the flowcharts look crisp and easy to read, and I understand, but the terminology could do with some tweaking. And that's the conclusion of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Does anybody have any questions for Sam?
Thanks. Thanks for all the work you put into this, Sam. It's obvious you've spent a bit of time on it. Just what you've been discussing basically is council buildings. This policy is for all buildings, and I just wonder how you see the community buildings being assessed. Do you see it by people complaining about it from neighbours, or do you expect council to do any work? How do you see that following through?
I think it should be on a notifiable basis, so that if somebody sees an issue that they deem to be a health risk, be it a smell of raw sewage or structural failure, then yeah, council could be the point of call. But keep in mind, I could engage 5 engineers for one dwelling, and they'd all have different perspectives. So I think we do need to sort of maybe, hold the horses back before they bolt on some of this. One opinion is not clean cut, and you sort of need to get a good range of perspectives. And then in saying also, if council are able to hold a cover on the land because of repairs or remediation or assessments, then I think that should be allowed for the homeowner or occupier as well to be able to use it through council in the same sense.
Okay. And the other one was you were discussing potable water. That comes under another bylaw. So that, as I say, that's part of it.
It's in the resource document to say that non-potable water would consider a building insanitary. So it is actually in this policy, Bob.
Vanessa?
Yes, I can probably comment on that a bit, Sam. You've talked a bit about the definitions in the document. Mm-hmm. Those definitions are direct from the Building Act itself. Mm-hmm. So I appreciate they are a little bit confusing at times, and it's something we have to navigate on a daily basis. Mm. In terms of potable water, we wouldn't be looking for water supplies to be chlorinated. So these days, if we consent a dwelling on a site that's got its own bore, we would expect at co-compliance time that the customer or owner would give us testing to prove that E. coli and that doesn't exist in that water supply.
It's more in the sense of that buildings that were on bore supply, and I know of a couple that are now in possession of the council but weren't previously, those buildings are placarded as non-potable.
Sorry, Sam, can you just reiterate that again? I just missed what you were saying there in that comment.
Okay, so council previously community-owned buildings that have subsequently been taken over by council, if those buildings aren't connected to main supply, then they're placarded as unpotable.
Vanessa, do you want to?
I can give examples later. I don't really want to do it in a public.
Okay, sure. Vanessa, do you want to?
Yeah, that's fine. I'm not aware of any that we've placarded from a building perspective, so I'm wondering whether it's more the water utility side of things that's done that.
Potentially from testing or something.
Maybe.
Okay.
I think that, so you talked about failed sewerage and temporary allowances, portaloos. Vanessa, are you able to just talk a little bit about that? Because you've talked about how we're not going to be testing, we're not requiring chlorinated water, but we will be testing for E. coli. What are we looking for with failed sewerage? And is Sam's option that he's talked about with allowing people to have portaloos, is that going to be something that we need to add additionally into this, or will that automatically be an option available? And how are we looking to remedy things for people when we've got something that's failed, to give them the scope and time to be able to save up potentially?
So I think one thing to realise is the threshold for us issuing a dangerous, affected or insanitary notice is extremely high. And the situations where we're typically going into buildings which are just not occupiable at the time. I guess an example of a failed sewage system would be if a septic tank, for instance, was overflowing in the backyard, the house might still be quite livable. And that's where some of the other submissions that we've received on this policy talk about including the support services that we can wrap around people. And I think that's something we need to include. It is something our staff do on a daily basis if they're dealing with these situations. We bring in health support and social services where required, but equally it's about working with the building owner. So if the house was livable and it was a septic tank issue that they needed to get that pumped out and replaced or sorted out, then yeah, absolutely we could work with them to obtain portaloos and remain in their property, because one thing we recognise through emergency events, it's always better to leave people in their homes where you can.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Lovely.
Right. Sam, is there anything you want to clarify or any questions you'd like to ask while you're here? I think we should make the most of that.
No, I just sort of wanted a more narrowing of the scope of what we'd deem. So I think that's sort of encompassed in that. So.
Yeah. Okay.
Cool.
Appreciate
Awesome.
that. Thank you very much. John Very, if you'd like to come up to the front, please.
Kia ora, koutou katoa, Madam Chair, panel, staff and others. The presentation is on behalf of the Melbourne Community Board. Just want to be clear at the beginning that one of the things the Community Board doesn't do well is have great technical expertise, so we defer to the staff. But one of the things the Community Board does do well is engages with the community, listens, and then responds. So this presentation and the original submission was in draft form provided to the 14 to 16 odd residents associations in the Melbourne ward. They were given the opportunity for feedback. It was circulated to various other groups and people who were also given the opportunity for feedback. The feedback was read and incorporated where appropriate and as appropriate into the submission, as the board recognises that it would be not in the best interests of good policy to actually bow to every feedback received. It needs to be weighted. So recognising that the board is in an advisory capacity, would just consider that maybe changing the lead words at the beginning to preventative engagement, compliant-driven response and proactive monitoring engages with the community a little bit more than some of the technical material. I think it's important, in referring back to the previous submitter, that there is a role for the council to be proactive, and I think there's also a role as a council for staff to be proactive generally. Not that I want to suggest that every staff member should undergo training and become a mini building inspector, but obviously looking at some of the slides that were presented, it should be obvious to most people that something's amiss, and maybe within an internal policy, with greatest respect, that there should be some way of moving this up the hierarchy so that the councils and effectively the ratepayers' assets do get protected. And this is in a line also with submitted number 1, that it's all very well to have complaints, but complaints can be vexatious, And I think there is a definite role in the council taking more responsibility. Then I think also aligned with submitter number 4 that the policy would be improved with the greatest respect if it was to enhance transparency and communication. And this would mean that people reading it without a technical background like myself would be able to understand, and I'm sure that it would foster trust and ensure community support for what is happening. So maybe a community register on the website, given the large amount of money that's being expended on updating the computer systems within the council, would be helpful. And then I think clarity of timelines about what's due to happen and when. In the bylaw diagram, page 7, there's a skeleton. And the skeleton's all very well, but they can be scary, especially if you're not fully understanding what's happening. And I believe, on behalf of the board, that the diagram put out by the Ministry of Business is probably worthy of consideration, as the little line diagram in the original policy for consultation is just, I think, assuming a level of background, whereas with the greatest respect, having the fuller version doesn't add too much to the program, but at least it gives an understanding and people can be better informed. And then in relation to heritage buildings, would just like to reinforce the submissions made by Heritage New Zealand at numbers 17 through to 23, and also the Tai Whare Ora submission numbers 11 through 19. And I think it's important to have clear enforcement protocols, because staff have a very difficult position and a lot of responsibility falls on them, and I'm sure that there's an effective peer review system within the council. But I think that, as was mentioned by the previous speaker, that experts do differ, and one of the issues I think is of concern to many of the people that I've engaged with is that variability, and I'm not saying it's just limited to Selwyn, having experience in other councils, I know the issue well, that you need a consistency. It shouldn't just be because one officer is a little bit more rigorous or literal in their interpretation. And that again enhances public confidence. And at the end of the day, it's important because there are fairly draconian enforcement provisions within the legislation, and the policy is exposing people to these. So for consistency and fairness, not only do the criteria need to be clear, but how the criteria are interpreted and applied. There also needs to be clear and cost-effective means to seek clarification and even appeal decisions that have been made at the first instance. And again, this ensures a greater overall consistency. And given the current economic climate, the council should be proactive in providing advice and guidance on any cost recovery or financial assistance that can be available to people that find themselves in the situation, often through no fault of their own, that the building has become dangerous or insanitary. So effectively engaging with the community is great. Listening to the community and responding appropriately is even greater. And I think it's important that submitters have some feedback. As I said earlier, I'm not saying that council should make decisions on the weight of submissions, but I am saying that council should at least provide the weight of submitters a reasonable, rationale and logical explanation as to why their submissions weren't heard. And I know it would never occur by the panel that we've got today, but there have been instances, unfortunately, in the past where I believe some councillors may have got close to the line of harassment or bullying submitters. And I think it's important to note that even here, given the limited number of submissions, a clear message is sent by submitters number 2, 3, 5, 6 and 8. And I don't need to cause further embarrassment by quoting from those submitters. I'm sure that everybody in the room is well aware. So, thank you for the opportunity to present. The Melbourne Community Board appreciates that, as it's an important issue, and the balance really is to protect public safety whilst respecting the property rights and heritage values of those involved, and this, it is respectfully submitted, is best achieved by open, honest and transparent engagement. So on behalf of the Community Board, informed by the residents, community associations and others, we appreciate the opportunity to contribute to this important consultation, and I'm happy to answer any questions from the panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was brilliant. Would you have a question for us, Bob?
Yeah, just about heritage buildings. Do you think there should be a different threshold for heritage buildings against other buildings that are in their community, or what was your take on that?
Yeah, probably not a different threshold, but I do think there should be a different process, as is detailed more adequately in the Heritage New Zealand submission, because heritage buildings are of value, and I'm sure the council has a policy somewhere where they say that we want to retain what's valued of the past, but we don't want to put the community in danger.
Yeah, and thanks for what you've done, John. It's really good and concise, and we'll look into it when we're doing our deliberations.
Thank you.
Brilliant. I've just written a few things down. I'll just check if I've got any questions. Do we have any questions for John from the staff? Any points of clarification, or would like to say anything at all?
I don't think I have any questions, John, but yeah, really appreciate the efforts the board has gone to engage with a huge area that Melbourne covers to make sure that those residents have their say. And yeah, I agree with a lot of the things you have in your submission, and you will know from the other submissions that you've read, there's a lot of crossover around that community support and the heritage side of things, which I agree we definitely need to strengthen in the policy. Thank you.
Thank you. And as I said, from experience, I know it's a challenging job to pull it all together, but all the best.
I just have a question for you, John. You've got in here with changing the leading words to compliant-driven response. Are you suggesting that that's a preferred terminology, compliant-driven response? We're obviously, part of your submission's talking about the mistrust and the lack of consistency with building inspectors. You don't feel that that would be a term that's a little bit too triggering for people, given the history that the community seem to have with council dealings?
An excellent question, and I'll do the best to answer it. That, I suppose, in my view, compliant-driven response was arrived at because the implications of non-compliance are significant. They're much more than minor. And I think at the end of the day, in my view, an open, honest and transparent approach is not gilding the lily and calling a spade a spade. So, Madam Chair, that's why the compliant-driven response was there to, not quite a sledgehammer, but just to signal this is serious.
Right, okay, thank you. We'll finish with a closing karakia. If anyone would like to join in, please do. Unahia, tipo, kia wātia, ai kua wātia. Thank you all for attending and really appreciate the work that you've put in today to bring those submissions to us.